Okay, so yes, I'm just going to talk through some of the very basics of how to do simple searches on Simtho. So those of you who have already been using Simtho will probably be familiar with most of what I'm showing you. Some of it might be new. Some of it is likely familiar, but this is mostly for those of you who haven't really ventured into this tool yet and are trying to figure out the basics. So if we navigate to this main page that Slavo just showed us, we want to go to the bigger version, the version 2 that we talked about. So we're going to open that. And then, as Slavo said, we're going to go to the concordance to do our simple searches. All right. So here's where we're going to search for our words in Syriac. Let me switch my keyboard to Syriac. It's pretty slow. Okay, so let's search for a word. Let's say lahmo, bread. And search. All right, bear with my fairly slow computer here. Okay, here we go. So we get our results. We see we have 3,357 hits for lahmo in our corpus. Now, again, keep in mind, this is not all of Syriac literature. This is just for the corpus that is accessible via Simtho. So this is what our search page looks like to start out with. One other important thing to remember right off the top is that we're not going to find results for related forms of lahmo. We're only going to find exact matches for what we typed in. So we're not going to find lahme, the plural. We're not going to find possessives, lahmoch, lahmech. We're not going to find prefixes, belahmo, ulahmo, only exactly what we type. Later on, George will talk about how to kind of complexify our searches to find more of these kind of related forms. But for right now, we will only find exactly what we're searching for. All right, so we see each of our hits is in its own independent line here. And a few things about kind of just this first display. The first thing is that for those of you who have a preferred Syriac script, note that you can change up here to different scripts. Now, because I'm using a Mac, my Mac will often default to an East Syriac script, but for those of you who want different scripts, those are available here. All right, so we have each result in its own line here with the keyword in context, the word that we searched for in red, kind of in the center. The first thing that we can do is we can click on that red word if we want slightly more context. You can see, a few words on either side here, but if we click on this, we get a little more context and we can expand that even further on either side. Now, as George and Slavo reminded us, this is not a tool for accessing the entire text, but this does allow us to get a little bit more of a sense of the context if we need it. And then we can close that. The other nice thing that we can do with just these lines of text here is say that we're skimming through each line, just trying to get a sense for what we have and what's available and what this line is doing, how this word is appearing. And say we're skimming through and we come across a word that we don't recognize in Syriac. So say we don't recognize Yibisho, we can click on that and the browser will open another tab with the Sedra entry, and that will tell us what the word means. So again, my internet's a little bit slow right now, but this will show us the meaning of the word, dry, arid. All right, so we can close that and get back to our main search results. So yeah, that's what happens if we click on the red word or the black word. The other important thing for each line with the information that we have is the information. So Slavo briefly mentioned all of the metadata that's available for each of our texts or documents, and Bert will tell us more about that in his talk. But for now, if we want to know where this example is occurring, we can click on that and see all kinds of information about the author and the text, and the edition it was taken from, a rough date, etc. So that's where we can find some of that information. Another thing that we can find in each line is this button on the side here. This will allow you to copy your results if you want to. So this will only copy this line of text. It won't copy the metadata, but if you want to take this line and drop it somewhere else, that's a quick way to do that. Good to know. And if you want to change your view a little bit, you scroll down, you can change how many rows you're viewing per page, you can navigate between pages, those kinds of things. All fairly standard, common things for this kind of search. So one thing to know is that each of these columns that exists can be, you can sort according to that column. So you can do that by pressing this arrow. So if you want to sort according to right context or left context, that will sort the results according to the character immediately preceding or following your keyword in context. And you do that just by clicking on the down arrow. I'm not going to do that right now. It's not a tool that you're going to need very often, most likely, but knowing that it's there is good. But one of the more helpful ways to use this sort of column sorting is by using the info. So right now, what we're viewing here is what's called the doc ID. It's a unique kind of code for each of our documents. But say that we want to sort according to date. Say that we want to see where this term appears early in our corpus, late in our corpus, etc. We can do is we can uncheck doc ID. We can check epoch. Bert will tell us more about these categories again later on. We'll save that. And so once this kind of loads, what we have is we have the date over on the left. Now, if we want to sort according to the date, we just click on this column with the arrow, and it will sort accordingly. Okay, now all of the undated texts are going to come first, but if we want to go to a particular place in the dating, we can click on this jump to button, and we can go where we want to go within that sort. So we can go to some of the earliest dated texts and kind of see where that starts to turn up, right? Again, keep in mind that this is only for the corpus that we have. So there may be earlier or later texts that exist. This is not definitive for all of Syriac literature. It's only for our corpus. All right. So say we want to undo what we just did. We can see this sort up here. We can just unsort. And I'm just going to go back to viewing doc ID for ease of reference. Okay, so now I'm going to talk you through some of the basic features in this sort of top bar here. This button is how we change the basic search that we've done. You click on this, and it will pull open a similar bar to what we were looking at when we first searched. A really important thing to keep in mind is that the back button in your browser is not a super helpful tool when working with Simtho. It will often take us back further than we expect. We're not always sure where it's going to take us to in the process of search that we've just done. And so often it will have unintended consequences. So rather than, if you want to redo your search or change your search, don't press the back button, press this instead. You'll thank yourself, trust me. So this is where we go to change or redo our search. Next is the download button, kind of universal symbol for download. For this, we can download our results, any number of them, into various formats. And the nice thing about this is that while copying your results won't copy the metadata, the download should. So this is where if you want to take your results and do something else with them, this is going to be one of the first ways that you want to think about doing that. Okay. So Bert's going to talk to you about some of the metadata and ways to view according to the different categories of metadata. So I'll leave this button to him. Now, we've talked about different ways to sort our results according to different categories or contexts or whatever. But say that we want to get a more random sampling of seeing just a few representative examples of where this word is going to appear. We don't want to see all of John of Ephesus first, for example. There are two different ways that you can think about doing that. One is this intentional random sample button. So if we use this, we can get a random sample of whatever size we determine, taken from across the corpus, so that we're not looking at all of a particular author or particular date or particular text first. If you read these instructions here, it'll point out to you that anytime you select a random sample of exactly 200 from the search results for Lahmo, you'll get the exact same 200. This is actually a really nice feature because it allows us to kind of replicate our results. So we can have the exact same random sample every time we look for it. But if we want to change it all up, if we change it to 199 or 201, there'll be 199 or 201 completely different random samples. It won't be the same 200 plus or minus 1. So that's convenient for finding different sample sizes and different discrete samples if we want to. Now, the other thing we can do, if we want to just more quickly kind of look at a random sampling, is we can shuffle the lines. So if we click on this button and click shuffle, here we go. We can see just by looking at these doc IDs that it's a pretty random collection of lines kind of all mixed up. And so this will give us kind of a bit more of a representative idea of where the word appears across various texts. And again, as with other things, if we want to undo what we've just done, we can kind of just exit out of this little thing here. All right. So one more tool that I want to show you is this filter button. So say we don't just want to look at the examples of the word lahmo. Say we want to look at examples where lahmo appears, bread appears in the context of eating. So somebody's eating our lahmo. We can change this to include the word echal or ochel, right? It's not distinguishing between these homographs. So if we filter to include only the lines that include echal in context of lahmo, we see that our 3,357 results become 56 that have echal or ochel in close proximity to lahmo. Now, you're probably asking what determines proximity or context, how close or far can it be? It's an important and good question. And conveniently, we can define that. So here, remember, KWIC is keyword in context, so that's our search term. We can determine how far to the left or right of the word we want to search. So say we want to set it to 5 instead of 3 words. 3 words on either side is kind of the default. We can change that. So let's rerun the search with echal with 5 words on either side. Oh, and let's get rid of that first level. So we had 56 before, we have 69 now, because we've expanded how we're defining context, right? One other thing I want to point out about the filter tool is that you can add filters to filters. So here we're filtering to include echal, but say we want a context that not only includes eating of bread, but also some kind of drinking, right? So let's set our context to a nice large 5 on either side and include the word shofe or so. Again, it has to be an exact match, like orthographically to this. It won't include other forms of the word, but hits that will include exact forms of that. Aha, we have only one. So if we want to see what one it is that includes lahmo, echal, and shofe in context, we can click on our information and we can see, okay, it's from the Pshito, it's from the book of Luke, chapter 7, verse 33. There we go. So you're probably already starting to think about the different ways that you can use these tools for the kinds of research you find yourselves doing. Obviously, there are a lot of different applications, and we're all going to be using these tools in different ways. The exercises that we'll do after this will give some examples, kind of artificial examples of one way we could think about using some of these tools, but start thinking through the applications that are most relevant to you. Now, one other thing I want to point out about these basic search features is that we don't have to search for just a single word. Again, George is going to show us some of the more complicated ways we can search for phrases in various forms of words, but even if we just want to do a basic search for a phrase, we can do that here. So say we want to look for bar priomo in the singular. I'm just going to put that phrase in here and search for it. And here we go. We have 35 results that have that exact phrase in that exact form within our corpus. And again, all the same things apply. Say we want to sort according to author. We can go in here. Instead of doc ID, we can go to author. And then we can sort according to this column that has the authors now. And so you can see where each individual author uses this phrase. And just like we did before, we can also filter for a search with a phrase to look for ones that include other words or phrases. So let's again set our context to 5 here. Say we want to find examples that include the word buono. All right, there we go. We only have one result that includes both bar piuomo and buono in context. If we want to see what text this is, we can click here, scroll down. There we go. So these are the basics of how to run very simple searches using Simtho. I will stop sharing my screen for now. And we're going to go into some breakout rooms to try some exercises.
We hope you enjoyed the Simtho tutorials. Our Metho Lab team in the Middle East continues manually correcting OCR text to give you access to more accurate texts. The Metho Lab operation is entirely supported by donations, and it provides young men and women in the Middle East with much needed employment during a time of local crisis. Our project also promotes pride in their heritage as workers contribute to promoting their own culture.